There is a mountain of new evidence and brand new reporting today that undercuts the original lie told by Donald Trump and his cabinet in the wake of the shooting death of Renee Nicole Good, that she was somehow threatening the life of the ICE agent who killed her. That lie has been used by the Trump administration to justify a surge of federal agents, more agents being sent to Minneapolis, and ever-increasing brutality being used against Americans and immigrants alike. A comprehensive analysis of currently available video footage by the New York Times shows that the ICE agent who killed Renee Nicole Good was not being run over, as Donald Trump and others have claimed. Watch.
This moment is when Agent Ross fires. We see the other agent pull back from the SUV. Both of them stumble, apparently slipping on the ice. This is also the moment many have said looks like Agent Ross getting run over. And it does when watched at full speed. But looking more closely, we can see in multiple angles that there's a visible gap between the vehicle and his legs, indicating his feet are positioned outside the SUV's path. The agent's left hand is still against the vehicle and gripping his phone. We see as he fires, it's recording the clouds and the trees overhead. It's not because the agent is knocked to the ground. The other angle shows he's still standing, continuing to maintain his grip on his phone and his gun, and we see a clear and growing gap between his body and the SUV as he fires a second shot and a third.
The New York Times also reports and concludes that it was indeed Good's killer who made the now infamous comments after shooting her.
According to our analysis of audio from Agent Ross's cell phone video, this is his reaction.
Good.
It's the F word followed by the B word. A reminder, Donald Trump said that Good ran over the ICE officer who shot her. Vance said that she aimed her car at the officer. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, wearing a cowboy hat, called her a domestic terrorist. All of that now flies in the face of all of the evidence and everything that anyone can see with their own eyes and ears. Transcripts of the 911 calls were also released last night. They capture the shock that firsthand eyewitnesses expressed and felt and shared with 911 operators in the immediate aftermath of the shooting. A sense of panic and a sense of fear for their own lives and the safety and well-being of their children jumps out from these transcripts. One caller says this to a 911 operator, quote, "A bunch of ICE agents on 33rd in Portland, they just shot a lady point blank range in her car." When the operator asks, "How many are there?" he responds, quote, "There's 15 ICE agents and they shot her, like, because she wouldn't open her car door." Just before hanging up, he says this, quote, "Send an ambulance, please. Ambulance, please." Another caller to 911 tells a 911 operator this, "ICE just shot someone on Portland between 33rd and 34th, shot an observer in her car and it crashed," end quote. The 911 operator responds by saying, quote, "Okay, somebody else just called us and, well, can you see the person who shot it all?" The caller responds, "I'm sorry, I had to walk away because I have young kids and ICE is everywhere over there. But the person who was shot, you can see the car ended up crashing, so I don't think they're okay," end quote. New details and brand new evidence about the shooting death of Renee Nicole Good and what it says about the Trump administration's gaslighting of Americans is where we start today. Senior contributing editor and Minneapolis native Michele Norris is back with us. Also joining us, former DHS Chief of Staff during Donald Trump's first term as president, Miles Taylor is here, and former senior advisor to President Biden and Vice President Harris, the former mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu's here. He's now the co-chair of American Bridge 21st Century. Michele Norris, as we've done so many days since this happened, we turn to you for your reaction to the new evidence being made public today.
Well, it paints an ever more vivid picture and an ever more gruesome picture of what happened there in the 3400 block of Portland Avenue. One of the things that I think that we should be looking for is also the communication between the ICE officials and local police, because I wonder if they reached out to the local police, to sheriffs, to someone, to EMTs, to get them on the scene. The language there certainly does not comport with the hasty conclusions that were made by the administration and shared with the public long before anybody had a chance to investigate this. There are so many questions about protocol here, about how quickly the car was taken away, about how quickly her body was taken away, about, in normal investigations, when you talk to law enforcement officials, normally what they do is they would separate everybody who was there on scene to make sure that they could take testimony and that no one could collude and get together and get their story straight. None of those traditional protocols were handled. And so that's what happened in the 3400 block. What we're seeing now in the days after that is what has flowed from this in the state of where people feel like they're living in a state of terror and under a state of siege. It's also been reported today that there were, on Wednesday night, when there was that shooting on the north side of the city, there were some children that were taken to the hospital because they were in a van with their parents. The parents were trying to turn around and get away from the crowds that had gathered there. And you remember the pictures from that evening. There were chemical irritants that were used. The pepper pellets were used. And one of those flashbangs was emitted in the direction of the car, and there were several children in the car, and a couple of them had to go to the hospital, including a 6-month-old child who lost consciousness and stopped breathing for a time because of the chemical irritants that were in the air. DHS said that they were actually the victims of, and I want to get this right, rioters and agitators, and not the immigration enforcement agents. And they were saying if it were not for the people who showed up to observe or to protest, they wouldn't have had to use the flashbangs. But that's but one example of the kind of terror that's gripping the city, where children are wondering where their parents are. Some of the schools have been closed. We've talked about this. There's a lot of online learning because people are afraid to send their kids to school. Businesses are closing. People are afraid to go to work. And also, we learned this afternoon that DHS has subpoenaed the personal information for employees of the Hennepin County healthcare system. That's a huge healthcare system. And they've subpoenaed that so they can get their home addresses, their social security numbers, and their employment eligibility. And this is an example of how this affects everyone, because it's not just the immigrants who work or the suspected immigrants or people who are thought not to be citizens. Everyone who works in that medical system had their information subpoenaed, and people don't feel comfortable about this. So this is something that is affecting the entire area of the Twin Cities in the state of Minnesota.
Why are they seeking all the personal information of everyone in the healthcare system?
To check employment eligibility. I mean, it is thought that there are several people who are working in healthcare who might have immigration status and might not have legal immigration status. And it's a way that they can, check their eligibility. Oddly, I was talking to an attorney about this, and he said that they're uncomfortable with them seeking the information, but they do prefer that they actually look at information as opposed to doing the indiscriminate sweeps that seem to be happening elsewhere in the city, where they appear to be just approaching people who are commuting, who are on their way to work, who are on their way to school. He said at least in that case, they're at least looking for information to figure out someone's eligibility without, before just indiscriminately targeting them.
Michelle, who is protecting the civilian population of Minnesota right now?
This is a really difficult question that the police department is dealing with, that lawyers are dealing with. If you remember the images from Wednesday night, it was immigration officials that were doing crowd control. And that's not something that immigration officials do. I was talking to someone who works in law enforcement in the Twin Cities at that time. And, when they were looking at these images, he was wondering how many of those people on the ground have actually had training in crowd control. How many of them actually understand how to de-escalate situations like this? So, that raises one question about, are they there to protect and to serve people? Have they been trained, in how to do this? There are a group of lawyers that met this afternoon, convened by the former Associate Justice of the Minnesota, actually not convened by, but it was a, let me get this straight. It was a conversation that was moderated by a former Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, very high-ranking person, someone who is very well respected, attorneys from big firms, corporate attorneys, a very large number of lawyers coming together and trying to figure out what's happening when the rule of law appears to be so fuzzy right now, and figuring out there will be a lot of lawsuits that flow from this, but also just figuring out who is there to protect the people, who is there to protect the guardrails around American democracy and the rule of law. And there have been so many lines that have been crossed, and so many protocols that have been completely ignored or warped in some way, that the people of Minnesota in government and in the legal system are trying to figure out how to move forward in this, and not just let this completely melt away, but figure out how to establish some sort of guardrails around the rule of law so that citizens are protected.